Hello my friends, welcome to the Electric Viking. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thanks if you've donated on Patreon to support the channel, it means a huge amount to me. And thank you for watching. I hope you've had an awesome day. Now, isn't it interesting to think how things could have been so different with electric cars had a few decisions been made a little bit differently? And there's so many opportunities over the last century for different companies to make them work, but for some reason they didn't. The interesting thing about this is some of the companies that were the first to create electric cars, decades, and I mean decades before Tesla got involved, are now at a point in which they have a good chance of going bankrupt by 2030 because they've fallen way behind. Now, before Carl Benz's patent of an internal combustion car in 1886, our ancestors and forebears were already finding ways to electrify a chassis with wheels. The earliest record of a human carrying electric vehicle dates back to April 1880, the brainchild of French inventor and electrical engineer Gustave Pierre Trouve. Built using a James Starley English tricycle, the first electric car is a three-wheeled wonder with a modified Siemens electric motor and a lead-acid battery pack. As fate would have it, Trouve could not patent his creation, but his successors were luckier in this regard. Now that electric vehicles are slowly entering mainstream consciousness among car buyers, I've decided to pay homage to history's most influential electric vehicles and then look to the future of EVs. 1884, Thomas Parker's electric car. English inventor and industrialist Thomas Parker's first patented invention is a modified steam pump. Still, he was driving to work in Wolverhampton in an electric car that he designed and built in 1884, 10 years before Britain's first taste of a petrol-powered car. So, electric cars came before petrol-powered cars. Incredible. Now, Parker has a knack for fuel-efficient and clean-burning vehicles, which led him to create the first production electric car. He even designed a steam generator to recharge his EV's lead-acid battery pack. So, not only did he make an electric car, he also made a hybrid electric car. Now, historians actually regard the Flocken Electro Wagon, sounds kind of cool, I reckon, Flocken Electro Wagon, as the first real electric car though. It was first built in 1888 and the Electro Wagon was based on a chassis similar to Gottlieb Daimler's motorized carriage, although the Electro Wagon came with an electric motor, of course. Now in 1890, William Morrison built an electric carriage. Scottish chemist William Morrison's electric carriage is the first practical horseless carriage built in the United States. It can carry up to 12 passengers on 3 bench seats and it had a 20-mile-per-hour top speed. Now, what about the first electric car company in the United States? Well, in 1894, mechanical engineer Henry G. Morris and chemist Pedro G. Salem founded the first electric car company in America, the Morris and Salem Electric Carriage and Wagon Company. Their first electric vehicle is the Electrobat with 2 1.5 horsepower electric motors, 25 miles of range, and a top speed of 20 miles per hour. Pretty good for 1894. Another famous vehicle, electric vehicle, was built in 1897. It was the Bersey Electric Taxi Cab, the first electric taxi ever made. What about in the United States? What happened with taxis there? Well, interestingly, the Hansom cab was built by Henry Morris and Pedro Salem, founders of the electric carriage and the wagon company. After Isaac Rice acquired the company to form the Electric Vehicle Company, 12 Hansom cabs roamed Manhattan streets until 1899, with the first being built in 1897. So, who won the first ever race in the United States? Was it a petrol car or an internal combustion engine vehicle? Well, the first race was held in 1898 and it was won by the Riker electric vehicle. Andrew L. Riker designed the Riker electric car in 1898, built in small numbers by the Riker Electric Vehicle Company until 1901. The Riker EV won the first automobile race around a United States track. So there you have it. Now, what about the first road car to do over 100 kilometers per hour or over 62 miles per hour? Believe it or not, it was an electric car made in 1899 called the La Jamais Content. The La Jamais Content, the Never Satisfied, is a torpedo-shaped electric vehicle built in Belgium in 1899, 122 years ago. Driven by Belgian driver Camille Genatzi, it was the first road vehicle to go over 62 miles an hour or 100 kilometers per hour, courtesy of two 25 kilowatt direct drive Postal Vinet electric motors. So it had 50 kilowatts. That was a lot of power in an extremely lightweight vehicle built 122 years ago. So what about Thomas Edison? What was his first car? It was actually the Baker Electric, made in 1899. The very first Baker two-seat electric vehicle was Thomas Edison's first car. Edison also designed the nickel-iron batteries that were standard in some Baker electric vehicles. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of Studebaker. Well, interestingly, before building gasoline vehicles in 1904, back in 1902, American wagon automaker Studebaker entered the automotive industry with a battery-powered electric car. Studebaker continued building electric vehicles until 1912 before shifting exclusively to gasoline-powered automobiles. Now, what about electric trucks? Believe it or not, electric trucks were actually made 114 years ago, back in 1907, with the first of those called the Baker Electric Truck. Baker had 17 electric models in its lineup in 1907, but the biggest in its range was a 5-ton electric truck. Baker electric trucks were designed and created for business owners and were sold until the company's demise in 1914, 7 years later. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but Viking electric cars back in 1910 or 110 more years ago must have had terrible range. Not so. In 1912, the Argo Brown had 75 miles of range. That's over 100 kilometers. The Argo Brown is a 4-passenger electric vehicle with up to 75 miles of range. It came with a pair of Westinghouse electric motors for a top speed of 20 miles an hour, or around about 32 kilometers an hour. Now keep in mind that back then, pretty much all roads were just dirt and bumpy tracks. So you probably wouldn't have wanted to go much faster than that. Now, what happened after this? Electric cars were doing so well. Well, the electric car slowly faded to oblivion between 1915 to 1954, partly due to the much celebrated Ford Model T and its affordable $650 base price. However, there were other factors at play. Road infrastructure was significantly improving by the early 1920s, spurring the need for faster vehicles with greater range. Now, speed wasn't an issue. As you can see, there was an electric car that could do over 100 kilometers an hour back in 1904, but range was. Now, American inventor Charles Kettering invented the electric starter in 1912, eliminating the need to dangerously crank gasoline engines by hand, something that people didn't like doing. By 1897, Milton O. Reeves and Marshall T. Reeves invented the first muffler to reduce petrol engine noise significantly. The worldwide discovery of massive crude oil deposits led to cheaper petrol and reduced a petrol-powered car's operating costs significantly. Now, spurred by the global energy crisis and growing concern amongst the effects of global warming and hydrocarbon pollution, interest in electric cars saw a resurgence in the early 60s and late 70s. Hardly anyone knows about this. Now, 1959, the Henny Kilowatt. The Henny Kilowatt was produced from 1959 to 1960. The Henny Motor Company sold 47 examples of the Kilowatt to electric utility companies across the United States. It had a top speed of 60 miles an hour, 100 kilometers an hour, pretty good for 1959, and it had a 60-mile range. So as you can see, the range of these cars didn't change at all between 1910 and 50 years later in 1959, because we pretty much didn't work on the technology for 40 years. Now, later on in 1966, Chevrolet actually built the Electro Vere. Now, General Motors was silently experimenting with electric cars in the 1960s. Very few people seem to be aware of this. Based on the second generation Chevy Corvair, General Motors built the Electrovare as a proof of concept. The Electrovare had a top speed of 80 miles an hour, faster than quite a number of electric cars on sale right now, and a range of 40 to up to 80 miles. General Motors could build an electric car then, which could do 80 miles and had a top speed of 80 miles an hour. Just imagine if they had a focus on developing that vehicle for, say, just 20 years, between 66 and 86. If they just spent 20 years silently working on these cars, maybe not investing millions of dollars, but just having some engineers work on them, just imagine what they might have had by 1986, 20 years later. Now, before Elon Musk thought about launching a first-generation Tesla Roadster into orbit, the Lunar Roving vehicle, or moon buggy, was the first all-electric vehicle to land on the moon. Built by Boeing, the moon buggy had a top speed of 11 miles an hour and served missions for Apollo 15, 16, and 17. And the first lunar roving vehicles actually built in 1971. Now, what about the much maligned BMW, who have, made the i3? They appeared to be doing something in the electric field, and then they just sort of gave up and told everyone electric vehicles sucked. So now they're obviously behind the 8 ball. Well, interestingly enough, BMW actually made an electric vehicle back in 1972 called the BMW 162OE. The 1972 BMW 162OE is the first electric car to wear the BMW badge, and it came with a 32 kilowatt Bosch electric motor and 12 volt Varta batteries. It had a range of 18 miles at speeds not exceeding 31 miles per hour. Isn't this interesting, right? BMW's electric car was far inferior to electric cars made 60 years earlier. How does that happen? Who knows? Let's fast forward all the way to 1990, when General Motors was at it again with the Impact electric concept. The Impact concept was the precursor to the General Motors EV1 electric vehicle. And there's some interesting conspiracy theories around that car, which may actually be true. The concept has an integrated motor and a single-speed transmission mounted in the front, producing 137 horsepower and a top speed of 183 miles an hour. Clearly, this vehicle was way faster than any other vehicle that GM had produced before then, and it was electric. Doesn't that tell you something? Clearly, it didn't. Now, before GM got off their butt and made the EV1, Chrysler made an electric van called the TEVan in 1993. The California Air Resources Board, CARB, began pushing for lower emissions and clean burning vehicles in the early 1990s. Chrysler was among the first to respond with its TEVan, producing 56 units from 1993 to 1995. It offered seating for 5 and had a top speed of 70 miles an hour. Pretty good for a van. Now, fast forwarding all the way up to 1996, GM finally made the EV1. They actually produced 1,117 units of the EV1 between 1996 and 1999, and it earned the distinction of becoming the first mass-produced electric vehicle from a legacy automaker, and it's the first electric car designed from General Motors from scratch. Now, GM scrapped building the EV1 and actually famously recalled all of them. No one quite knows why. But then, in 1997, they made the Chevrolet S10 electric. Can you see a pattern here? General Motors been working on EVs. Interesting, isn't it? The Chevy S10 electric is an electric variant of the car maker's S10 pickup truck. It has an 85 kilowatt liquid-cooled AC induction motor based on GM's EV1. It achieved 33 miles of range with a 16.2 kilowatt lead acid battery, but the range improved to 72 miles with a 29 kilowatt hour nickel metal hydride battery. Now, obviously, a 29 kilowatt hour battery in a pickup truck is very, very, very small. So let's say they had made that battery 4 times bigger to a reasonable size for a pickup truck, which would still only be 116 kilowatt hour battery, smaller than some batteries in smaller vehicles than that. Well, in theory, that could have given the vehicle a range of maybe 200 miles. Imagine if you could have bought this pickup truck back in 1997 with a range of 200 miles. It may have started the electric revolution then. The following year, in 1997, Honda, who are now floundering hopelessly with their EV plans, made the Honda EV Plus. The Honda produced 300 units of the EV Plus from 1997 to 1999. It's the first EV from a major automaker to use nickel metal hydride batteries, and it had a single brushless DC electric motor and achieved 80 to 105 miles of range. Now, why did this vehicle not take off? It seems as though this could have been the car to start. 80 to 105 miles of range in a small EV made for cities sounds perfect to me. In the same year, 1997, Toyota made the RAV4 EV. Now, Toyota produced the first generation RAV4 electric vehicle from 1997 for 6 years, all the way up to 2003. It had a 50 kilowatt electric motor producing 67 horsepower and 140 pound-feet of torque. Standard 27.4 kilowatt hour nickel metal hydride battery pack allowed it to achieve a range of 95 miles. Pretty good for a 27 kilowatt hour battery pack. Interestingly, it had a 50 kilowatt electric motor. But if we rewind all the way back to 1910, you'll see that some of the cars sold back then also had 50 kilowatt of power. So not a whole lot happened between 1910 and 1997 if we think about it in those terms. And now we get to Ford, who are in a perilous position of not really being prepared for EVs, even though they made one of the first pickup trucks well before the Tesla Cybertruck, called the Ford Ranger EV back in 1998. It was produced from 1998 to 2002, and the Ford Ranger EV had the underpinnings and regular cab body style of a gasoline-powered Ranger XL 4x2. Replacing its four-cylinder petrol engine was a 90 horsepower single-speed reduction motor powered by lead acid or nickel metal hydride batteries. In addition to Ford, we also have Nissan, who are similarly struggling with EVs. Before leading the commercial EV market with the Leaf, Nissan built the Ultra EV based on a Renesas station wagon. Similar to modern EVs, the battery pack is on the floor, while a single electric motor provides enough power for a range of 120 miles. Pretty good range. That's nearly 200 kilometers of range, all the way back in 1998. So what about the first electric sports car? Well, that actually came out in 2004 and it was called the Venturi Fetish. Monaco-based electric car company Venturi built the Fetish from 2004 to 2007. Fetish is the first electric sports car in the world, and it initially came with a 180 kilowatt electric motor producing 241 horsepower. The company launched a new version of the vehicle in 2011 and it came with a 220 kilowatt motor with 300 horsepower. Would have been pretty fast. Now, what about China? What was happening there? Well, BYD actually built one of the first EVs called the BYD F3DM. They built this car in 2008. Now, this was actually a plug-in hybrid. So what BYD did was they launched the world's first mass-produced plug-in hybrid vehicle, or a PHEV, in 2008 with the F3DM. It was a dual-mode compact car with an all-electric range of 37 miles. Pretty similar all-electric range to many of the PHEVs available on sale right now. Now, in combination with its petrol powertrain, it actually had a range of 300 miles. Pretty good for a car produced all the way back in 2008. In that same year, we saw the birth of Tesla with the Tesla Roadster. The Roadster is the first taste of what was to come from American EV pioneer Tesla, based on a chassis and body of a production Lotus Elise, but very, very different as the vehicle went through massive changes before it became the Tesla Roadster. The Roadster had a single electric motor and a 53 kilowatt hour battery pack. It went from 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds and had a range of 244 miles. So now we come to the Nissan Leaf, which actually was the world's highest selling electric vehicle until Tesla overtook it last year. The Leaf entered the market in 2010 with a paltry or very small 73 miles of range and a very small 24 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery pack. From 2016, the Leaf gained a larger 30 kilowatt hour battery pack to improve its driving range significantly. Since then, that battery pack has gotten bigger and range has gotten longer as well. The current second gen Leaf has a 40 kilowatt hour or 62 kilowatt hour battery to generate 151 to 226 miles of range. The following year, Chevrolet made the Volt. The Chevrolet Volt was a plug-in hybrid manufactured by General Motors. It was marketed in rebadged variants as the Holden Volt in Australia and New Zealand, the Buick Velite 5 in China, and with a different fascia as the Vauxhall Ampera in the UK. It's also called the Opel Ampera in the remainder of Europe. Volt production ended in February 2019. Only 1 year later, Ford actually made a Ford Focus that was all electric. Riding on a third generation Ford Focus hatchback's body style and underpinnings, the electric model initially came with a 23 kilowatt hour liquid-cooled lithium-ion battery, good enough for 76 miles of range. In 2017, it got a larger 33.5 kilowatt hour battery to deliver 115 miles of range. Now, if only Ford had have stuck at it. Imagine they could have potentially been a Tesla Model 3 competitor if they'd stayed in the market and actually tried to make a compelling vehicle. Now, BYD made its first all-electric car called the BYD E6 in 2011. It was an all-electric 5-door compact MPV with an 80 kilowatt-hour battery pack. BYD claimed a driving range of 248 miles and a top speed of 100 miles per hour. Now, I think this was kind of getting to that point where range anxiety probably wouldn't have been a factor. If you think about it, 248 miles of range, it's a long way. That's more than 400 kilometers. The following year, Tesla launched the Tesla Model S. Tesla Model S kickstarted the EV craze of the modern era. The Model S was a full-size luxury car and still is, with either a single motor rear-wheel drive or dual motor all-wheel drive powertrain. The current Model S Plaid has 3 electric motors for a combined output of 1,020 horsepower and is the quickest accelerating car in production today. It goes from 0 to 60 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour in about 2 seconds flat and has a top speed of 200 miles an hour. And the following year, in 2012, BMW made another average EV called the Active E. It was built in small numbers and was based on the 1 Series. It had a 125 kilowatt electric motor and a 32 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery, and it delivered 151 miles of driving range. As you can see, BYD clearly made a more compelling vehicle than BMW did back in 2011. Now, another car that's had a huge impact on the electric worldwide market is the Renault Zoe, which came out in 2012. The Renault Zoe actually first came out in 2012 and it's still sold today. It's an electric 5-door super mini that initially came with a 22 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery pack with 130 miles of range. The long-range model arrived in 2016 with a bigger 41 kilowatt hour battery for up to 250 miles of range. Now, what about Mercedes? What have they been doing all this time for this last century? Well, they built their first EV in 2013 called the Mercedes-Benz SLS AMG Electric Drive. The SLS AMG Electric Drive was an electric variant of the Mercedes-Benz SLS AMG Grand Touring sports car. It had 4 electric motors producing a combined 740 horsepower and 736 pound-feet of torque, and it accelerated from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. It was actually faster than the petrol-powered version of the same car. Let's fast forward to the year 2020, when the Aspar L was first debuted to the market. The goal behind Aspar L was to produce the fastest accelerating car, full stop, whether it be electric or ICE, and it achieved that goal. It has 4 electric motors churning out 1,984 horsepower, and it comes with a 69 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery. Now, the Owl goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 1.69 seconds and has a top speed of 249 miles per hour. I think the electric Owl kind of said to the world, electric cars are now. They are the future, and petrol and ICE cars are the past. Shortly after that car, along came the Rimac C2, now known in its production form as the Rimac Nevera. This vehicle was Rimatch's second electric car, and it was based on the same platform as the Pininfarina Battista, which was also built by Rimac. It comes with 4 electric motors and a 120 kilowatt hour electric battery pack, and it has 1,888 horsepower and 400 miles of range. It can do the quarter mile in a staggering 8.6 seconds. When this car came to market and was first driven on the YouTube channel CarWow, it was a seminal moment in motoring history. We'd gone from electric to ICE, and all of a sudden, 120 years later, we'd realized that actually electric cars were a truly superior form of propulsion. It took us 120 years to get there, but eventually we did. And now, over the next decade, the entire automotive industry will transition to electric vehicles. Some manufacturers will go bankrupt, and some will take advantage of this situation. It'll be a fascinating decade, and I look forward to seeing it play out. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.